Welcome back to Tech Life Stories. I am joined today by Alan Nance. Alan is a strategic technology leader, a pioneer of ITIL and ITSM. He's a digital experience expert. He's launched XLAs that have been adopted by major organisations, and he's going to talk about that in a bit more detail shortly. HDI, top 25 thought leader. Born in the UK, but has since moved to the US. He's also spent some time living and working in the Netherlands. Degree educated in sociology and business administration. He's worked for the likes of Philips, ING, EY, HP, and he's currently with Experience Collab as a consultant advisor. Alan, that was a bit of a mouthful. Have I summed you up well?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, jack of all trades, I guess. Moving around a lot. No, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I think if I look back on my career, it's been very much one of movement within the industry and movement across geographies and meeting lots and lots of people, which has formed the perspective that I'm going to share with you and the listeners.
Good, okay. Look, I've given a rough description of you. Because, like you say, you've got a lot of experience. So rather than us going deep into all your experience, why don't you just give us a general overview of how you first got into technology and the process of the jobs that you took and the path that you took and some of the decisions you took to get to where you are today, basically.
That's a good question, Khan, because one of the things I tell people now when I mentor them or when we have interns is that I think you have two choices in your career, and many of us make those choices almost by accident. I think, and it's even more relevant today with the world that Gen Z finds itself in. I think you either have a career or you build a resume. And both of them are good, right? I know a lot of people who have built a career in EY, built a career in HP, and it served them very well. They've earned well. They've had a great life. I am much more of a building a resume type of person, which means that every step that I take, and that's been more deliberate, I think, for the last 15 years, has to have an outcome. It has to do something. It has to achieve something. So I'm a resume builder, and that would explain a lot more of the movements. I've never stayed anywhere longer than 7 years. I'm not saying it's better or not, but what it has done is exposed me to a lot of different people, concepts, cultures, and technologies. I would say my career has three parts to it. There's the running large IT organization part of it that you see at GE, you see it at aircraft companies like at HP, Philips, ING. But there's also then the sourcing part of it. So I've done about $3 billion of outsourcing deals on the buy side and the sell side. And then the third part is the experience side of it, the customer experience, supplier experience, and employee experience. And those three things have come in and out as I've also done the big digital transformations at ING and Philips and some other companies. So those are the big three layers. How I got into this was by accident. When I left school, I was actually assessed. I don't know if people still do that. You're assessed for your suitability for certain walks of life. And one of the things that came out was that I was absolutely unsuitable for technology and computers, which is ironic. And I was actually on vacation in the Netherlands when somebody I knew said to me, look, you know what, we've got this opening coming at General Electric, and it's for a computer operator. And I said, okay, well, I'm probably not your man because they just told me I'm not. He said, look, no, it's easy. You just got to be a fast learner and speak English. And I said, well, I can do that. So anyway, I went, got the job, and the rest is history. I've been in technology ever since. I've never deviated from it. I've been in various forms of it, like finance, a lot of finance. But I've done, airports and aircraft manufacturing and all sorts of things. So that's basically the career.
So out of interest, did you have a potential career path you were thinking of before coming into the technology world?
I thought I was going to be a policeman, actually. I always thought I was going to be a policeman. I actually did consider the army, but back in the day, my mother's Irish, and we had the troubles in Northern Ireland. And my mother was absolutely against me going into the army, so that never panned out. So that was my original thought, was I was going to be a policeman.
Okay, nice. Okay, and whilst we're on personal, you've mentioned to me before, obviously you were born and bred here in the UK, and you moved over to the US, and obviously you've had your stint in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Talk me through how some of those transitions happened.
Yeah, well, they're very different. When you come out of England, and certainly then, because it was the 80s, and so Britain was in an amazing period of turmoil itself. We were moving from the industrial economy into the services economy, and so it was a bad time, and I don't know, some of the people listening might recognize it. We had steel companies closing, we had car companies going bankrupt, we had coal miners in dispute, and basically the whole structure of the industrial economy was falling apart, and England was in really bad shape. And so it looked very attractive at that time to move out of England, to be honest. And I don't regret it. I mean, I think, the 80s were really good for a lot of people in England. We did get that services boom that launched the service economy, not just in the UK, but worldwide. But that was one of the good reasons to move to a company that was to a country that was a little bit more stable. Which had a little bit more of a controlled economy than we had at the time. And also what I like about the Dutch, working with the Dutch, and to this day, is that they want to get on with things. They're quite happy to break things in order to move forward. And whereas in England, I always find, and still, the English are very much on quality. We want to get everything right before we do something. And it makes us slower. It doesn't mean we're not smarter, but we're always slower, even with the implementation of our own ideas. And ITIL is a great example of that. When I got involved in ITIL, it was a government initiative up in Norwich, and they had some really great ideas, but they couldn't move it. They couldn't evangelize it. And by bringing in that amount of Dutch energy and nous, I know what you'd call it, that's why ITIL really became successful, because it was the Dutch that took it globally. And you've seen that in a number of other areas as well. So I had a great time in the culture. And then, of course, when you go to the US, it's different again, because the Dutch culture is very much, taking other people into account. It's very much a societal movement. So what other people feel, it's almost like Hofstadter in his cultural analysis would call it a feminine culture. It's very aware of emotions and tries to deal with those. The American culture is obviously very macho, very direct, very market-oriented, very individual-centric. And most important in the American economy is what I would call the short-termism. It's quarterly driven if you're in large organizations. And even in the government, it's driven in these budget cycles. And so all of the outcomes are expected very quickly. This whole idea of 30-year programs, which you would see in Holland, for instance, you don't see in the United States. Maybe you did in the past with things like NASA going to the moon and stuff like that, and maybe in defense. But generally in the United States culture, it's about now, and what can I get done now, and when will I see results now.
Complete opposite to the UK then, as you say, about being longer quality. The US is quick cycles, quick wins. Would you describe it in that way? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, it's also because of the way our politics work, right? So, in the US and in the UK, we have majority rule that comes down to one party who do it for 4 to 6 years, whereas in Europe you have coalition governments. So there's stability over a much longer period of time, because oftentimes the same political parties are in government, even if they're different combinations. So you get much more stability. But on the other hand, the Dutch would never have been able to create the services economy because they didn't have a Thatcher or a Reagan who could push that with all the force of the country behind it. So it's good and bad. It's you take what you've got and you run with it.
Yeah. No. Okay. All right. And then going back to the ITIL, and you mentioned obviously getting involved with that, because obviously one of your statements on your LinkedIn profile is that you're a pioneer of ITIL, and ITSM. So elaborate for me a little bit on that.
Well, for me, and ITSM came first. So I was running the data centers at an aircraft company in Holland that later became part of Airbus. And at that time, we were just coming out of a failed merger with an American company, and we had an enormous impulse to radically improve our processes. So we were investing enormous amounts of technology, and it was very, very difficult to maintain the technology, to understand the technology, to manage the technology, and make the technology effective. So we worked with a company called Protocol and another company called Pink Elephant to get that under control. And when I left the aircraft company, I joined Pink Elephant, and I was keen to see a repeat of that capability, to basically formalize it, operationalize it, make it into something. And so I was on a trip to the UK, and I was talking to two influential people that you may have come across, Malcolm Fry and Ken Wilson. And they said to me, look, this is a great idea. We've done some work in this, but there's this project going on led by the government called the Government Information Technology Management Methodology in Norwich. And you should go and talk to them because it looks really interesting. So I went there, and I thought it was super impressive. It was a big, well-managed program sponsored by the CCTA at the time. And I said, this is great. This is great because the work's already being done. So we got involved in that. We contributed authors as Pink Elephant to that. And when I came back to The Hague, where Pink Elephant was, I thought that we were going to use this for our own employees. So we had about 1,200 employees. So I thought we were going to use it as a professionalization project within the company, so we could grow faster and have repeatable solutions. But Michiel Westerman, who was the founder, came up with the idea. He said, why wouldn't we just package this and sell it to the market? Because everybody has the same problem in the 80s of a proliferation of technology. Nobody knows what they're doing. It's become super expensive to manage. And so we went back to the CCTA and said, look, this isn't about government. So even if it's called the Government Information Technology Management Methodology, GITM, we can't fly with that. We can't push that because that's not going to excite the private sector. So we need to change the name. And Roy Dibble, who was running it at the time, came up with it. I might be wrong. Somebody will certainly correct me once this goes out, with the name ITIL, which was the IT Infrastructure Library. I didn't like that either. To be honest, but we ran with it, and we went back and we formed a steering committee of the top companies in the Netherlands. This is a very Dutch approach. So we had Shell, and we had Philips, and we had a bunch of other people, ABN AMRO, and they were guiding us in this. And of course, everybody in the steering group then went out and did their own projects. So very quickly, there was a buzz about this is important. And then there was a second player who was important for us, which is Exin. Exin said, you know what, we need certification for this. So Exin, we came up with the ITIL Essentials and the ITIL Foundation and all of those things. And that really took off. I mean, Exin took that all over the world as quickly as we can. And when Pink Elephant broke up into two companies, I started a company called Quint Wellington Redwood. So you now had these two companies, a bit like Spain and Portugal in the 15th century, who were going out competing with each other everywhere they could, doing battle everywhere, taking it to the States, taking it to the UK, and that created enormous amounts of energy. And so ITIL is where it is now because of that.
So you have literally had, first-hand demonstrable inclusion into what ITIL is today then?
Yeah, I mean, I stopped because I've been trying to escape ITIL. I can't get escape velocity out of it. because I think it was, I mean, it was amazing, certainly version 2. I think when we got to version 3 and version 4, there were two things that have turned me off of ITIL, I think. One thing is when we started, there was a guy called Brian Johnson, and he and I, together with some other people, Ivor Evans, and so we created the ITSMF, which is still very strong in the UK. And our goal always was that ITIL would be owned and managed by the community. That was the reason to create the ITSMF, not just to do conferences and events, but to actually guide it and work on its permanent development. That's lost, right? So now obviously PeopleCert own that, Axelos owned it before, and for me, that's a huge disappointment to put that in the hands of a commercial company that has its own competing interests. So that was the first thing that hurt. Second thing, I think since version 3, ITIL hasn't made a serious attempt at being best practice. So version 3 was the introduction of what I would call best opinion. Obviously, people didn't have the money that the government had. The government had lots of money to do investment into real best practices, had lots of people writing books and doing research. Axelos PeopleCert can't afford that. So what they have done is they've gone out and they've found smart people to give their opinion on what should happen with ITIL. And you saw that in version 3 for the first time. And the example I always give is the strategy book from Michael Neves. The strategy book had never been implemented anywhere in the world ever. And yet it was published as best practice guidance. And it was basically Michael Neves' PhD dissertation in there. And we got things like warranty, those ideas came out of that version 3 book. And since then, ITIL's only been about best opinion. There are no best practices. There is no evidence of anything in ITIL. And so that's the second thing that really turned me off. And I'm not knocking the authors because there's some really smart people who've done some really smart things. And then the third thing, which was the nail in the coffin for me personally, was that we're not in the service economy anymore. We're now in the experience economy. And so the things that were really important in the 1980s and the 1990s are not important as important now. So things that were like life-changing in 1988, 1997 or whatever are now what I would call the brilliant basics. These are things you should have mastered by now. These are things, if you're not doing them, you're not serious at your job, but they're not life-changing things. Service value change is not a life-changing thing. High velocity IT is not a life change. You should be doing that already and should have been doing it for the last 10, 15 years. So those three things, I said, okay, so I still have one foot in the grave or whatever there with that. But I do think it's time to move on. And I think if ITIL can't get itself back into a position that's doing real research and it's doing real best practice, it's going to continue to dissolve.
Okay, and you're saying obviously that's very much service focused. Everything's now more experience focused, and obviously what you're doing at the moment is XLAs, experience level agreements, right? So why don't you just tell me a bit more about what you're doing at the moment? You're working Experience Collab as a consultant advisor, and what does that mean, and how you've adopted those in some organisations?
Well, let me just go back a little bit to service management to explain why service management was important and still is important. If not the thing, it's a thing still. In the 1980s and 90s, there was a huge proliferation of IT, but there was also a back to core business movement. So anything that was not core had to be outsourced. And the governments were the biggest proponents of this. So you saw massive privatization programs going on. Now, if you want to privatize a service to somebody, you need service management because you need to define what the service is that I'm going to give to you. I need to tell you what's involved in that service, what the components are. Mm-hmm. I need to tell you what the performance that you need to give to me needs to be, and I need to have a contract that helps me to manage you and can work with you if you're not meeting the service that we've agreed on. So it made all the sense in the world that there had to be this huge investment in service management just to be successful in the service economy. Now, around 2003, 2007, that time frame was the start of the experience economy. So we got huge consumerization. The App Store was absolutely important for that. The proliferation of the internet and all the apps on the internet. So now suddenly you've got this movement where the IT used to be in control. We were talking about end users who were at the end of the mainframe, basically, and they got what they got and they worked with it. And now suddenly they are co-creating this with us. They're doing DevOps. They're doing citizen development. They're doing all these things at the other end. So the experience economy starts with what do they need and what do they want. At the same time, if you look at consumers have choices. They can go online. They can do go compare. They can. So now you don't win by having the best service. You win by having the best experience. Mm. And just like the service management, the experience economy needs its own tools. It needs different software. It needs different processes, different capabilities. And XLA is a core part of that. So whereas a service level agreement does what everybody knows it does, it defines and helps you to manage a service. And it focuses in as part of a service value chain. And XLA starts with what is the staged defined experience we want? What is the staged experience of a service desk, of a emergency room in a hospital, of a Disney ride? What is it that we are putting together here? How do we want our audience to respond to that? And what metrics are we going to use to see if we stay on track? And one of the biggest differences between an SLA and an XLA is its lifespan. So most SLAs will remain unchanged for a period of 20 to 25 years. Most of the SLAs that a company is running, even if they're new to them, have been in operation for 20 odd years. An XLA usually doesn't last more than 18 months. And the reason for that is people are notoriously fickle. You know, if I ask you, I say, you know, what's your favorite meal? And you tell me. If I give you that meal every day of the week for a week, at the end of the week you say, for God's sake, please don't give me that food anymore. Yeah. That's how. Whereas a service level, nobody's going to complain. It's going to go on forever and ever and ever. 99.9, 99.9, 99.9. So we have to be with XLA. We have to be much more aware of changes in perception, changes in offerings that change perception. And we need to understand the underlying service metrics. We need to understand those. But it's a very different environment. It's much more dynamic. It's outside in. It has to be designed with the audience in mind and then tracked back. And it is something that needs to continually be calibrated and maybe replaced.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So you reckon the lifespan of that is about 18 months?
About 18 months, yeah. And you see it all the time, right? So Amazon's a great example of this. Apple's a great example of this. All of the innovative companies are continually trying to tweak. Sometimes it's massive, right? Sometimes you say, look, I think what Tesla's doing with their truck, it's a huge, it's a game-changing thing. Sometimes it's not game-changing. Like at Disney, it might be tinkering around things. But even Disney, every so many years, Disney has to introduce new rides. It can't, if you went to Disney, if Disney hadn't changed in 30 years, you went back, you would be bored silly.
True. Very true. Even, like I say, I think slight tweaks. I think Disney have recently just changed their logo a slightly different colour. Very slight tweak. But I suppose it's, like I say, it's going through that kind of lifespan of experience level, agreements that need those adaptations every once in a while.
Yeah, and I mean, and sometimes they go and they come. I mean, another example for me is like alcohol-free beer. I remember when that was a no-no, everybody made fun of it. Now it's mainstream again. But it has to be cool, right? So they've made it cool. And so you look at the packaging, you look at the way it's sold, you look at how the narrative around it. And that's really all about experience management.
But do you think just a new generation that are attracted to that, is it plugging into the existing generations as well?
No, I think the concept of a multi-generational audience and a multi-generational workforce is important to think about and to talk about. But what I always used to say, because people should say, "Oh, Gen Z, they're so fickle and they want to keep moving around and they want excitement, they want change, they like gadgets and stuff like this." And I'm like, but every financial executive I've ever known wanted that, and they're all Gen X. So I think we all want experiences. We just want them maybe slightly differently. I think we all want to be members of a club that appeals to our senses. We all want a car that appeals to us, and so it's about understanding your audience. But I do believe all audiences are fickle, all of them. They're just fickle in different ways.
Yeah, and then going back to XLAs, with what you're doing at the moment, and implementing those in organisations. Is it a hard sell, or is it a sell which is still new to the market where you are getting any resistance?
Everything you start is new. I mean, I remember going to Shell with ITIL and saying and I made the mistake of using the words, "I think that this could become a standard," and the CIO at the time said, "We decide what the standards are, not you, young man." And so we still got that, right? So you go in and where we get adoption is what I would call the enlightened CIOs, the enlightened executives. Mostly, I've got a profile, mostly they're female. Mostly they come from outside of IT. Oftentimes they've come in to this role from finance or marketing or HR, and they've come in and said, "I don't understand this focus on technology." And so they are prone to adopting this. We see this at companies like ABN AMRO. We see it at companies like Unisys, where strong female leaders have led that. There are impediments, and one of the impediments is with the whole procurement mentality, right? So procurement is essentially set up unchanged since the industrial age. So it still looks at things like ROI, it still looks at terms and conditions, and it's still all about process optimization. Now, process optimization is irrelevant to winning in the market. I'm not saying it's not irrelevant to improving your profitability, but in terms of winning and growing your business is irrelevant. So this focus that you have in the service economy of supply chains is not important. But when you try to sell or position to procurement, that's where their mindset is. So that can be a limitation. And of course, there are people who don't believe it. They don't believe in experience. They don't believe it's got a good business case, which stuns me, because if you look at them in their private life, they absolutely are chasing the best experiences, whether it's the holiday that they're planning, the car that they're buying, the house that they're building, and yet they don't think it applies to the business that they are in. So I think it's going to grow. I think it's growing now. I think the people that are showing it are people, and if I look at the companies adopting it, these are high-profile companies in software development, high-profile companies in product design, and healthcare companies are very much ahead in the adoption phase.
Okay. Well, those organisations where you have resistance or you get resistance, right, how would you turn them into buying customers from you in the future? What are the hurdles you need to go or jump through to get them to look at XLA as like something that can make that much of a difference to the organisation?
Well, I think it's got to be about economic impact. When we do XLAs, and I always say this, we're not focused on calm. We're not focused on individuals. We don't care about you. We care about people like you. So the most important reason for taking that is scale. XLA has to be a scale proposition, and it has to affect the outcomes of the business. So what's really important for us is to link the value of experience to the challenges that the business actually has. So, for instance, in one of our customers, a big provider of software. So their core capability is developing software, which means that the the experience of their developers, their ability to recruit, train, retain, and make productive is key to their business. If we can show how the developer experience affects the bottom line, then we've got a case. If you have companies that, right now, mental wellness is a big thing. Mental wellness, you can look at it individually or you can look at it collectively. If you look at it collectively, then XLAs can help you to create the right working experience the right digital experience for your employees. Salespeople, if you're having a lot of problems with recruiting or the effectiveness of sales, the experience of the salespeople is essential. It's not about putting the best tool in. It's about the experience of the people with that tool. How are they adopting to it? Why are they not? Why do they not like it? And so once you get the economics down, then you really start to be successful. And even whole industries. If I take, for instance, the managed services industry is basically on its bum in terms of profitability. It's gone into this optimization decline. It can barely make money. Every battle for new business is ruthless. So in order to be successful, they have to not lose business and they have to win more business. And the way to do that is the experience. Because why do people dump their sourcing partner? It's generally because the relationship has started to fall apart, and the relationship is falling apart because it's measuring the wrong things. And so it's not measuring the relationship. Most MSPs don't really measure the relationship, certainly not on a daily basis. So they're doing it what's in the contract, and what's in the contract are services. And what's in the contract are unchangeable SLAs, and what governs the contract are expensive change orders. So unless you break out of that paradigm and you go across to saying, okay, we're actually partners in this. You, the IT organization that are contracting us and us, we are partners in creating an experience that's going to make a difference to this business. And so you see MSPs really, really trying to adopt this. Unisys is, in my mind, one of the best. Capgemini also coming in fast to really try to adopt this. But again, they also have the issue of we've got to get the buying population to understand how to change and understand how to buy.
Yeah. Do you think there's XLAs can be implemented in all size organisations, or is there, does it start with 100 plus user base kind of type of organisation, or does it not matter at all?
Well, so the thing about XLAs is it's a concept, right? It's a concept that if you already got that concept, if you're working with 5 people in a team, you all know each other. You all know how you feel. You can talk to each other every day. So the need for XLAs is as the company grows, as you get to scale. So I don't think it's. I think you're doing it probably autonomously. I don't know where there's a cutoff point. Most of the companies we've worked with are fairly large, to be honest. So I don't think it's like, oh yeah, you've got to have at least 50 people or at least 100 people. I think you have to have a complicated audience that because this is about the audience. It's not about you. So if you've got a complicated audience, so you're in a complicated marketplace, and the experience is important to your audience, that's when you need to structure this thinking. You can't just be dependent on amazing employees. So if I open up a restaurant and I have amazing people in the kitchen, amazing people in the front office, amazing people cleaning up, I don't need an XLA probably. But if I want to run a chain, if I'm Gordon Ramsay, I need to set a designed experience. I need to build a stack that defines the experience, the sentiment that I'm trying to create, the memories I want people to take away, and then all the operational layer, the SLA type stuff, technical stuff underneath.
Yeah, okay, that makes complete sense what you said there, and that kind of put it into perspective a little bit more for me hearing that. So I'm just thinking for me, because you mentioned the MSP market, and your words. A bum, I think you said, not making money.
Right.
Yeah, so it's bum, not making money. So if you're for those MSPs that maybe are listening to this,
Yeah.
that are, a SME type organization, maybe don't have the same type of resources and capabilities that a Unisys or a Capgemini does. What can they do to make a difference at this stage?
Well, there's a maturity to XLAs, right? Just like we used to say in ITIL, start where you are with what you have now, and I think that's true now. So you've got something now. You've got enough now to work. Version 1, which is where most of the activity is in technology anyway, in IT, is getting a sense of what is happening now. So this is not what I would call a designed experience, but it's looking at what the experience is of what we've got. And so a version 1.0 is basically the experience of the technology. It's not the experience of the audience. So we've got things like NextThink, SysTrack, 1E, that will tell you basically what the sentiment is around the desktop, what the sentiment is around Office, what the sentiment is in the office, basically. And that's a great start. You can start there, and you will learn from that. Now, the limitation of that is you're measuring something that was never designed to be an experience. So as you master that and you start to understand what triggers your audience, what your audience is unhappy about today, then you start to plant the seeds of, okay, so what type of environment should it be? When we talk about hybrid working, I think we talk about hybrid working too much as a noun, and we try and define it. So hybrid working is 3 days in the office. Hybrid working is using these systems, whereas hybrid working is a verb. And it's a verb that's based on the experience of the person that is doing the hybrid working. So you've got to understand what a hybrid working needs to look like, what experience parity looks like between working in this situation versus working in that situation. Now, from maturity, I hope I'm not confusing you too much, but if you start off by understanding the basics of how people are experiencing the tools you've given them, then the next step is to understand the dynamics of the environment they're in. And then you keep moving up. Ultimately, for XLAs, you want to get to the real audience that makes a difference to the business. So if you're designing products, it's going to be your designers. If you're doing research in pharma, it's going to be your researchers. If you're building a house, it's going to be your architects and your builders. And so if you're in ER, it's going to be your patients and your nursing staff and your doctors. And that's when you go there, then you're in a much, much higher level of maturity. But that's not where everybody is. Most people right now are at the beginning of this journey, which is absolutely fine. I would also argue, Khan, that even today in ITIL, most people are still worried about service desk incident, problem, and change. They're not doing capacity management. They're not doing availability management. They're not doing high velocity IT. They're not doing service value chains. They're trying to get the service desk to work. They're trying to do incident management. So the brilliant basics, we're going to have that in XLAs for a while as well.
Okay, really interesting. And look, you mentioned hybrid working, and it's not really the conversation I wanted to talk about, but
okay, sorry.
You did mention it. So where do you see the workforce in the next 5, 10, 15 years? Because hybrid working, I mean, I think we were heading that way anyway. COVID just elevated that by 5, 10 years anyway. Where do you see the workforce in the next 5, 10 years? Is it as it is now, or do you see that changing?
I see it definitely changing. And I think, and I see companies struggle with this, right? And I see it through my kids, because my kids are all Gen Z and entering the workforce. And all of them have a hybrid work structure. Some of them demand that structure. So I think we are going to an everywhere, anywhere workforce. I think AI just makes that even better, because you've got central resources that don't have to be physical, that you can rely on. I think that's what it's going to be. And I think that the digital nomad is going to be, instead of being the outlier, that's going to be it. I mean, it was interesting. My daughter recently joined Endava, and they have the most amazing working abroad policy. She worked in a company before that I won't mention. So you've got to be in the office 3 days a week. We don't do remote working. And she left. And now she's in a company like Endava that says you just have to be productive. And we're going to measure you on your outcomes. And you can live anywhere contiguously in the world as long as you can do your job. I think it's up to 20 days, if I'm not wrong. I mean, employers have to think about, how do I attract the best people?
Yeah.
And this dogma about, but we can't work with people being out of the office. I mean, then you've got to change your management because your management's an idiot. But again, this whole idea, we did it with cloud. Cloud had the same thing. There were people that saw cloud as a noun and they were defining it as on-prem, off-prem, which is silly. Cloud is a verb. It's a way of getting something done. And hybrid is exactly the same. So you start with the audience. You don't start with the company. You start with the audience. If your audience is your employees, you've got to define the experience you want to give them, which is working anywhere, anytime, but obviously secure, obviously having access to data, obviously being able to use that and monitoring their well-being, because you're going to need to be smarter at that when they're remote. It's more difficult to monitor people's well-being. So looking at patterns of work. But it all starts with the audience, and then you will get the right decision. You will get the right decision.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said there. There was two things I was going to mention. One was the well-being part, because I think it's easier said than done working from home on a regular basis, seeing the same four walls. It can be a lonely place. I know that because it's what I do. I have to make myself go for a couple of walks a day. I have to once or twice a week now go work in a coffee shop or a co-working space. So it can be frustrating. So I need to do that for my well-being, because it does bring me down being on my own in the same four walls. But also the other point I was going to make is that organisations and ensuring that they keep their company culture going. If you was a remote-only organisation, I think it's harder to gauge that company culture. I mean, tell me what your thought process is on that.
Well, I think you have to work harder at it. I think the company, because don't forget, and the larger the company, the more likely that you won't have all your employees in the same space anyway. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to really rethink this from the audience perspective. As far as digital well-being is, I think it has to be also designed into the structure. I mean, a good example is at Lyft, for instance. Lyft is a sort of Uber in the United States.
I'm aware of it, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think you've got it in the UK. But so if you're a Lyft driver and you're going somewhere and they haven't heard from you before, they will send a message saying, "Are you okay? We expected you to do this drop off. It hasn't happened. Are you okay? Do you have any issues?" Things like that. I know that seems trivial, but things like that, reaching out to people like EY, the EY employee experience measures over 1 billion points of data per day on its employees. And for instance, if you're doing onboarding and you're expected to do something, they will reach out to you, say, "You know what? It looks like you're struggling with this. Do you need any additional assistance? Here's a video link if you need to do more about this." So I think also building it into the system in a way that doesn't seem threatening to the employee. They don't feel like, "Oh my God, somebody's watching me all day," but is actually genuinely helping people enhance their skills, enjoy their time at work. I think we have to build that culture, and we have to have XLAs that help tell us how successful we are with defining the experience for those employees.
Yeah, it's really, really well put. And look, you've obviously managed, I mean, over the years, a whole host of different IT departments. I mean, what kind of sizes have you met? What's the largest size of IT operation you've managed before, Alan?
Well, it's difficult to say managing because in my experience, you manage like 3 or 4 direct reports, and they manage the others.
The overall department.
So I worked in most of the organization I've worked in have been thousands of people, which is why you realize the distance between you and other people, and why this idea that a manager knows his people or her people. Management by walking around hasn't been possible for decades. And also management walking around isn't particularly useful if you're in multicultural spaces. So certainly most of us today in these large organizations will have an offshore contingent. And if you've got a bunch of people in Eastern Europe, or a large group of people, like TCS had a huge amount of people in India, obviously, but also in the Philippines. So I'm not answering this very well because I don't think it's about the numbers. I think, again, it's about audiences and understanding different cultures. You cannot impose something in India that you've done in the UK. Even in Eastern Europe, which is maybe more culturally aligned, isn't that you have to really spend time understanding the audience.
Yeah. No, I get where you're coming from. I think what I was trying to get at was that I was just trying to think of the right wording to use, but I think I'm more concerned about employees and the breakdown of communication. For example, you're working from home, you have a line manager, you might not realise that actually you are struggling with some complexities of your work.
Right.
So when do you ask for that help? When do you ask for that support from a so-called manager if you're an online resource, if that makes sense?
Right. Well, yeah, but again, the reason I'm saying that it's cultural, because certain people will ask for help, right? Certain cultures are more aligned for help. And I think
some aren't, though, right?
Right. And I think also that things that we've tried to stop, like peer support, which we never managed to do, peer support is actually one of the things you want. Peer support is actually very, very vital. The more you get into this digital nomad world, because you pointed out that, and you're absolutely right, that if you're a digital nomad, you're going to attach to other digital nomads.
Yeah.
So, and the danger with that is that your affinity goes towards the customer, or your affinity goes towards other digital nomads, and you dilute the relationship with your employer. So I think we've got to, again, think this through and set up support mechanisms. Go back. I mean, even today, 51% of all incidents are not reported to the service desk. So how are they being solved? Well, they're still being solved through peer support. And I think peer support is a great way to start looking at actual emotional support, wellness support. But again, I would try to put XLAs on that, because how do we know what predictive things can we see? So again, like EY, they're looking at adoption. We're expecting you to do certain things. Lyft, they're expecting you to be at certain points in the day. They're expecting you to be online at certain points in the day. So pick up on those things without being creepy. But I think that the support has to be decentralized as much as possible. And maybe, so one of the things I do, and I'm just making this up, I do a lot at Capital One Cafe here in Delray Beach. Maybe we invest more into, so Capital One right now is a facility. It's not a wellness facility. But but there are probably, at any moment, there are probably 30 people working in there. You get to know each other because it's always the same people in there. You get to know the Capital One people who are, doing the coffee and the food. But maybe those types of environments need to have a wellness attached to them, like a counselor, like a talking point, a registration point, or something like that, because you've got to go where the audience is. The audience is, and especially if the audience isn't feeling hunky-dory about themselves, reaching out has always been an issue, right? Because we know we've all had people who've committed suicide, and the first thing people say is, well, we never saw that coming. Can't believe he did that. So people are not good at reaching out. So I think we're going to depend on indicators, and we've got to build them into our system. But we do have to build it into the audience, wherever the audience is.
Yeah. I recently had on the podcast Daniel Breston, who you know.
Yep, very well.
Who talks very openly about mental health, and he was very honest and said, back in his early career, he probably didn't check in with his staff on a regular basis and ask them how they are, etc. where he'd done that in the latter part of his years, and he wished he had that philosophy that towards the end of his career, early on in his career, because obviously there's a very famous video that he sent me around Norwich City Football Club. I don't know if you've seen it, Alan, but it's two guys going to the football. One's cheering non-stop, one's quiet, and the video's geared towards. And then one day basically the one that was cheering non-stop is the one that had passed away, basically, and it just goes to show that you don't know what anyone's thinking unless you ask.
Exactly, it's like the Robin Williams effect, and but that again tells me that it's not enough to put up a poster, and it's not enough to say, I'm here for you, or give them a number, because otherwise we'd be much more successful with those. I do think there's a role, and I've talked to Dan about this, I do think there's a role in XLA is to try to pick up indicators. Yeah. It's not going to be perfect, but it's something we're not doing now. We're not picking up indicators. And I think if you think about it, you apply design thinking to it, especially the concept of modes. So not so much the concept of moments, but the concept of modes. I think we can do a lot more. I really do. I like
the council idea. And so going back to what you said, because you said, is it called Capital One Facility? So is that like a co-working facility? Is that what that is exactly? Yeah, it is. Yeah,
it is. It's actually a bank. It's originally an idea we pioneered in ING, and then after the great financial collapse, we sold the ING cafes to Capital One. They've continued to do it. So a portion of it is the bank. It's very, very, it's just two people standing there chatting with you if you want to do something. There's a coffee and a food bar. And anybody can just come in. The internet's free. You can just come in. There's a couple of booths you can use for calls and stuff. And if you've got a Capital One card, the coffee's 50% cheaper.
Okay, all right. With you.
And it's on the main street. So it's just one of those. It's not as formal as WeWork. You'd have to become a member or anything like that, So it's pretty cool.
But do you think those places like WeWork, do you think they're the right solution for the way the future of work is going?
I think they might be because, again, I'm very ADHD, so I move around all day. I'll go to a Starbucks and I'll go to Capital One. I'll be here and I'll go upstairs, and so I think there's an absolute role for people. For certain people, it's great. I mean, there are a lot of people who work remote because there is no office close to them. That is just the way they are. They live out in the sticks somewhere. So I think there's a lot to be said for it. But I don't know, and I honestly don't know, whether WeWork understands that it has a role to play in the wellness discussion. Yeah. I don't know. But I think they should. I think anybody who wants to set up a facility where people come together to be creative, to work, to talk, has to embed some form of wellness design into its offering.
I agree with you. I mean, I've been to a WeWork building, but I don't know whether the wellness side is as instrumental as maybe what it should be based on this conversation in those. I mean, we use WeWork as an example. There's many similar facilities across the UK particularly, but wellness should definitely be built in a lot more. I like what you said about the council. I think that's a great idea actually. If you had like an on-site kind of counsellor at one of those WeWork type buildings where, if you are feeling a little bit down or whatever, you can go and just talk to someone, right? Because
people have masters.
No one really knows. If you're a remote worker or if you're a freelancer and you work for yourself, no one's going to know you well enough to come up to you and ask you, tell me about your problems. Whereas for yourself if you're feeling down, like
people disguise depression extremely well, right? People disguise it. They work to obfuscate. They don't necessarily want to be the subject of conversation, which is why I'm a big fan of indicators. Now, one of the reasons I think WeWork and others don't do it is because for a long time, experience has been designed as fun and happy, right? So the emphasis has been on what can we do that's fun, what can we do that makes people happy? Well, let's give them free drinks on a Friday and let's put in a table tennis table. That's not experience. Experience is about memories. It's about how you remember things. And how people remember things, people build their experience like birds build nests. They go out and they get pieces of stuff and they stuff it away. And everybody does it in a unique fashion. So what we're trying to do is to get insight into how they're building that nest and what that nest looks like. It's not whether they're having fun or not, to come back to that Robin Williams effect. Depressed people can be very, very fun to be with. So it's also looking at what you can't see. And when you look at things differently, the things you look at change.
Yeah. I like what you said there about experience equals memories at the end of the day. And me playing table tennis against someone I don't know about isn't necessarily going to build. It might be an experience. It's not going to bring me a long term memory. But I get what you mean about the XLA and incorporating that and the benefits of that. I mean, look, we are coming to the end of the podcast now. We've obviously spoken quite a lot about XLAs, but if someone wanted to, someone listening wanted to find out more about XLAs, where's the best place for them to reach you?
Well, just send an email right now. There's going to be some interesting announcements coming up in June. But right now, I would say alan.nance@experiencecolab.com. I don't know if you can put it in the link or whatever.
I will do, 100%, yeah.
And anybody wants to reach out. Look, I'm at a stage in my career now. It's not about me. It's about helping other people be successful, about helping other people move the needle. So I'm very keen to connect to anybody who wants to be involved. Anybody's got ideas, great. Just reach out. I'm quite approachable.
You're very approachable, Alan, without a doubt. Is there anything that we haven't covered today that you want to get your message across?
No, I think this is interesting. I mean, obviously, we've covered a lot of wide-ranging things. I'm sure I've annoyed a lot of people, especially with my views on ITIL.
I annoy them on a weekly basis now, so don't worry about it.
But I appreciate the chance anyway to talk about this. I appreciate the interest. Thank you.
No, not a problem at all. Well, look, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you for your time. I'll put your email address in the notes so people can reach out to you as and when needed. And I wish you well over in the US.
Thank you so much, sir.
No problem. Bye-bye. Bye.